It's the eye of the tiger, it's the thrill of the fight, rising up to the challenge of our rival. Or should I go with Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto, Domo, Domo, Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto, Domo, Domo. Oh, couldn't knock his block off. Oh, well, welcome back, everybody. We're back to Sports Psych. We are doing Chapter 8 on aggression today. That's why we had the guest lecturers of Red Rocker and Blue Bomber from Rock'em Sock'em Robots. So basically, boxing is true aggression. Okay, there are sports that, as its nature, are aggression, but there's other sports that there is an amount of aggression in it, but isn't a necessary part of it. Okay, so what we'll do today in this lecture is define what we do mean by aggression, talk about the dimensions of aggression according to Silva in terms of the different categorizations of aggression, talk about how we measure aggression, and how we can decrease aggression and aggression in sport. Okay, so first things first, like we do in most chapters, we want to define the concept that we're investigating. So what is aggression? Okay, you have a sense of what aggression is. It's like to harm somebody, right? Okay, so let's expand that definition, and I've got the definition actually color-coded on the PowerPoint slides. Okay, so how we do define aggression is that it's the infliction of an aversive stimulus intentionally on an unwilling victim in order to achieve an outcome successfully. Okay, so let's break it down. We'll go inside out a little bit here, doing the part that seems most obvious. It's the infliction of an aversive stimulus. You're trying to hurt somebody. An aversive stimulus is just something that that person who's receiving it finds unpleasant. That's all we mean by aversive. Okay, and it's done intentionally. Okay, so if you just happen to be playing soccer and you kick somebody when you try to hit the ball, but you miss and you kick the other person, well, that isn't intentional. So that's not really considered to be aggression. Okay, so aversive, even though it's an infliction of aversive stimulus. So it's infliction of aversive stimulus done intentionally on an unwilling victim. Okay, so that person does not want to be on the receiving end of this aversive stimulus. And it's done to achieve an outcome successfully. So there always is a reason, according to this definition, why aggression occurs. And we'll break it down in terms of what those two things might be when we talk about these different dimensions of sport aggression. Okay, so that's the next thing I want to talk about. Silva is the person responsible for this idea of what are the different dimensions of sport aggression. So it breaks it down into three different categories. One, sport assertiveness, which actually is an aggression. It's bordering on a type of aggression. Then we have instrumental aggression, and then we have hostile aggression. So those are the three different categories according to Silva. What you'll also see in terms of the diagram of these different dimensions is it's in the form of a Venn diagram. That is, there's a lot of overlap between each two of these dimensions, and there also is a subset where all three can overlap. All right, so let's think about this also in terms of cognitive psychology. Whenever we have any sort of category or concept like this, there is going to be a lot of fuzziness, as it's actually called in literature. Okay, so something like a vehicle, that has been studied in the cognitive literature. You might think, well, vehicle is like a car, right? Okay, and there won't be any debate as to what that is. Well, how about roller skates? Is that a vehicle? Okay, or bicycle? Okay, so basically, there are, most of our natural categories, as we call them in cog psych, is that there's no, hard and fast boundaries. There will be some sort of argument or fuzziness of where those boundaries are. Okay, and this is really going to be true when we talk about aggression and these different dimensions. Okay, so let's step back through what each of these three things are. So, sport assertiveness. There's no intention to harm, so that's what makes it assertiveness and not aggression. Okay, especially when we overlap that with the definition. You're not trying to hurt the other person. Okay, what you are doing is doing legitimate force, within the confines of the rules of the game, but you're doing it with an unusual amount of energy expenditure. Okay, you're really hustling more and more and more, and so that's this idea of sport assertiveness. Okay? The two types of aggression: instrumental aggression. Step that through again. The intent to harm does exist. That's what makes it aggression. So the first thing is there is intent to harm. It is done because you are trying to win. The reason you're doing the aggression is to try to help you win the game or the competition. And the third thing is that it's not done with any sort of anger. Okay, so the emotion component is not there. You're trying to hurt the other person, but it's not done in terms of anger. Okay, and again, the goal is to try to win the game. We contrast that with hostile aggression. Hostile aggression, the intent to harm is there. It's done with anger, and it's done for the sole purpose. The goal in this particular case is to actually hurt the other person. Okay, so those are the three different types of dimensions of sport aggression assertiveness. Like I said, there's going to be overlaps between here, each of those three, and to help you guide that through that, I give a whole bunch of examples of aggression that has occurred in sports. Okay, I'm sure you can come up with a whole bunch more. Actually, throughout the years, I've been adding, subtracting. There's always going to be some examples of aggression. But I think some of the ones to really focus on would be any sort of hard slides in baseball. A person who's on first base trying to break up a double play. He or she slides hard into the shortstop or second baseman trying to make the pivot throw to first. Okay, if he at some point there's going to be an instance where the runner's trying to knock down the second baseman. Well, if you're really going for their knees, okay, that might be again not assertive. That would be beyond the rules of the game, and that would be more instrumental because you're really not trying to hurt the other person. You are still trying to break up the double play, but you're really going beyond the confines of the rules of the game. Same thing with like a flagrant foul in basketball. Okay, there's different types of fouls. So if you're trying to break up a layup, okay, how hard of it is there any sort of intent to harm the other person? Is it done because again you're just trying to prevent them from scoring, or is there some sort of grudge that you have against the other person? And you've just filed them harder because you're actually trying to hurt them. So again, there may be this overlap in these particular cases of instrumental and hostile aggression. Some of the other examples that are in the PowerPoint, some of the classic examples, are Elizabeth Lambert, the college soccer player who's gained a certain amount of infamy because of all her acts of hostile aggression within the game. Probably the most egregious was pulling down her opponent by the ponytail and yanking her to the ground. Okay, so other examples, the Malice in the Palace example, the classic, unfortunately, example of Ron Artest going to the crowd and fighting with fans. So there's a number of different cases of aggression, not only between players, but also between players and spectators, and also unfortunately between players and officials has happened as well. Okay, so a number of examples. I'm sure you can come up with a number of examples on your own. Okay, but whenever you see any of these examples, think about what is the intent. Okay, that's going to help you define whether or not it is hostile or instrumental aggression. Another example, again, that name gained a fair amount of infamy was Albert Hainsworth stomping on the head of Gerard, who was, I believe, the center on the Cowboys at the time. Okay, stomping on somebody's head, pretty much hostile aggression. There's no, the play was over. There was no need for it. So again, there seems to be, some true examples of hostile aggression versus some of the overlaps between the two. Okay, all right. The other one that I have a post of there is Sterling Gibbs, punching Ryan Archidiacono. One of the reasons for doing that is because it does seem to be a hostile aggression, but what also it shows is that even if somebody does commit hostile aggression against you, that doesn't mean you have to retaliate. Okay, so in this particular case, Archie Diacono did not retaliate, even though it was a very, flagrant example of hostile aggression in that case. So you may want to just take a peek at that, that one too. Okay. All right. So take maybe I'm not positive all these links are going to work, but just take a look at them. And if you want to suggest ones to me, just email them to me, and I'll share them with the class as well. Okay. All right. Again, one of the key problems with this is that you never can really get into the person's head. I mean, you don't actually know whether the person is, angry or is, trying to hurt the other person. Sometimes it's pretty obvious. Sometimes the player will admit it, but a lot of times the player will say, "Oh no, it wasn't, I wasn't really trying to hurt the person." And Draymond Green, just happened to, kick, an opposing player in the groin. Okay, yes, that just happens, Okay, so there are situations where everybody's going to deny being angry, but the evidence really does suggest that the person is, doing hostile aggression. All right. Next thing in the chapter, how you measure aggression. Basically, you can do that through direct observation, naturalistic observation, as it's called. You can also do lab experiments to see if aggression occurs in the laboratory. The classic Bandura experiments with the Bobo doll. They were measuring aggression against this doll in children. Okay, how many times the child punched or hit the Bobo doll with a hammer. So we can do lab experiments. Problem with lab experiments is that is there a high amount of external validity, as it's called. Just because something happens in an artificial lab situation, is that something that would actually happen in real life? Again, that's been debated since research started, basically. Okay, so we have those as dependent variables. Other things we have as dependent variables: projective tests. We talked about projective tests a little while ago. The TAT and the Rorschach ink blot tests. Okay, we actually talked about that way back in chapter 2, in terms of measuring personality. We also can use these tests to measure the amount of aggression. So if you have this ink blot and you imbue in this ink blot or project into this ink blot, two people fighting, two people are in a knife fight, or things like that. That is, again, according to the interpreter subprojective test, those are things that are going to indicate a high degree of aggression in that person. Okay. We also have paper and pencil tests or objective tests. The Buss and Perry AQ for aggression questionnaire is also used. What's nice about this is it's got a bunch of items that you just either agree with or disagree with on a 5-point scale. Okay, but it does break down to subscales. It does measure physical aggression, verbal aggression, anger, and hostility. And you may think anger and hostility are about the same thing, but hostility is more like a worldview. It's like you're angry about the world, that you're hostile, that things haven't gone right in your life. Okay, and things aren't going to get better. So there's situational anger basically versus a worldview of hostility. Okay, so those are there are these paper and pencil tests that have been used to measure aggression. Okay, last thing really quickly is how can we decrease aggression or at least violence in sport? If we go from just instrumental aggression and then go all the way to the idea of violence, how can we decrease violence in sport? Basically, the AASP has created these guidelines. The idea is that everybody's in this together. Okay, management, players, coaches, fans, officials. Again, one of the things that you may see in the Lambert video is that the officials really didn't stop things, okay, from getting out of hand. Officials have to do a better job of making sure that violence, that the aggression doesn't escalate into violence. Alcohol policies, having people that don't promote aggression, are all things that have to be done to decrease violence. But the last thing is we have to want to do that. Okay, so not everybody is on board with that, but if everybody wants to decrease violence in sport, then it can happen. All right, so that's it for today, and so I'll talk to you guys very soon.